And we're going to start the recording for drafting 131. Let's look at the syllabus and the schedule. And today we are also we are working on introduction to 3D modeling with AutoCAD. Next week, next Monday, we'll have a midterm. So you should have drawing 3 is due on the 24th. So you still have one more day to finish that, but today we're starting introduction to 3D modeling. And then we'll issue the next drawing next class. And let's change this. Let's see, we are 131. Yes, let's change these dates here because this is wrong. And this one. Let's look at the schedule for today. Okay, so we're gonna do introduction to 3D modeling, 3D template, 3D basics workspace, view cube, visual styles, and UCS. I'm gonna duplicate this tab and bring it here on the side so I can see what we're doing. And let's get back to the modules. In the content here, I have placed some links to content that will help you understand 3D modeling with AutoCAD. To do that, I am going to open AutoCAD first. And one of the things that we do when opening AutoCAD is we start a new drawing. By default, the new drawing that we always have started up until now is a 2D drawing, right? And so we are going to, this time, open a 3D drawing template. And so I'm going to do File, New, and then select this template today. This is called the AutoCAD 3D template. Before we used to select a CAD. Now we're going to select this one, 3D. Open. And as you can see, now we are on 3D AutoCAD. And this is a new environment that we are going to be using. At the same time, we are no longer going to be using this ribbon. So I am going to select at the bottom right corner the workspace changing tab and select 3D basics. And you see the ribbon has changed now to be a new AutoCAD 3D modeling ribbon. In AutoCAD, we are going to be navigating the three-dimensional space through the use of the view cube. The view cube is this object here on the right. And if we click on the corners of the cube, you see how they highlight. Then the location changes. You can see how we're changing location here. once again. And so it rotates so that we can see every part of the object. Another thing that happens with the view cube is that you can notice that it's got the coordinates, right? North, south, east, and west. And so by default, this cube is set to a perspective view, but we would like to change it to isometric view because it's better to work with isometric views. Isometric views allow us to have true measurements. The perspective view does not. In order for us to make sure that we are using or viewing an isometric view, I am going to right click on this coordinate, right click on top of the coordinate, and then select parallel. And that way now our view is set to parallel. Another thing that I like to do by right clicking is also to set this view to home. And now if by any reason I get lost on 3D, I can move my cursor up here, kind of upper left side of the cube. There is a, it's not visible easily, but there is a house icon. If I click on that icon, it's going to bring me home to the home view that I just created. And that's how I navigate on 3D with the view cube. Now, as you can see, the view cube also has the possibility of viewing the object from many sides, or looking at the workspace, right? If I click on front, it creates a front view. If I click at the top, it creates a top view. If I click on the corner, it creates that kind of view. And then I can go home again, right? So this is very useful. I can even click at the bottom of the cube, right? And now I'm looking up, down. And so that's the workspace, right? As you can see, we, let me set this one as home. You can see the user coordinate system icon right here. That's what this is called. You can see the X and the Y. And for the first time, we see the Z axis, right? Going up and down. Typically, we work on this view on 2D, right? This is the 2D view, X to the right, Y up and down. And then the Z axis is coming in and out of the screen. So when we were working in AutoCAD 2D, we were actually kind of floating on top of the view, looking down. That's what we do. So we created line work like that. Now, in 3D, we are going to go to the 3D view, and you can see how all the geometry in AutoCAD is created on the X and Y coordinates. This geometry does not have a value on the Z-axis. And that's one of the main things that we need to understand when working in 3D with AutoCAD, is that previously we only work with AutoCAD on the X and Y. Also, and let me delete these objects, we need to understand that AutoCAD only creates geometry on the X and Y axis. AutoCAD cannot create geometry on the Z axis, or at least the starting point of the geometry. Once you create a basic profile, then you can input a value for the Z axis dimension. But you need to create all the first profiles are going to be created on the X and Y. For example, at the top, we see now the basics 3D modeling tool. I'm going to create a simple box. This here is a set of tools called the primitives in AutoCAD. Primitives define primitive shapes. They're pre-made shapes. So I am going to create a box. Click anywhere and then see how I am populating the X and the Y axis. Once I enter those dimensions, then I can enter the Z axis, see? And I have created a three-dimensional object. But AutoCAD is always going to create the geometry starting on the X and Y. And when we create two-dimensional geometry in AutoCAD, we're always creating that geometry on the X and Y axis. One second, let me verify some things here. Okay. Oh, I don't know what that is. Okay, so once again, let's create another box. I'm going to select up here, click X and Y, and then up. And that's a box. And so remember that we can navigate this by looking to rotate that box with the view cube. We can look at the views on the sides. We can look it up from the bottom, or we can go back home. Right, that's the home tab. Once again, if I want to create geometry on a flat surface, go to the top view, right? So the UCS, the user coordinate system, changes as I click on the cube. Let's create a 2D object here. Done. Now let's look at this on 3D. And the object is created at X and Y, right? It does have a 0 value on the Z-axis. Let's look at the properties of these two objects. I'm going to select this object, right-click, Properties. And see, it says here, X and Y vertices, right? That's the only dimension that I have. I have a dimension on the X and dimension on the Y. There is no Z axis here. What happens if I select this object? Right-click Properties. Now I can see a Z axis there, right? And let's see why it doesn't have oh, it's got a height. And so the height is the Z axis, right? Let's look at this one again. Yeah, it doesn't have the height, right? And so that's what we do in 3D. We find that. Now, AutoCAD will create geometry in 3D using the primitives. So I can select to create a box. I create a cylinder, for example. Up. I can create a cone like that. And see, I just need to follow the prompts from AutoCAD, right? Let's do a cone again. The first prompt is to specify the center, specify the radius or diameter, and then specify the height. And done. Pretty simple to do, creating geometries. Now, another way to create, and AutoCAD can create three types of three-dimensional objects. AutoCAD can create solids, and then it can create surfaces, and then it can create meshes. Those are the three different objects that we can create as three-dimensional objects in AutoCAD. Once again, we can create solids, then surfaces, and meshes, right? And so, for example, if I create a sphere here, that's a solid object, meaning that it's got virtual mass, right, inside. But if I create a sphere with a mesh, is empty. Let's see. So that one is empty inside. It's not a solid sphere. Oh, it might be solid. Hold on a second. It's just a different object, right? A mesh. Or I can create objects that are just a face. And so, for example, a planar surface will create that. It's a 3D object, but it's flat. And I could create an object in 3D that has only faces. And so it's not a and that can be only created also on the X and Y. So even though it's an object that is supposedly three-dimensional, it doesn't have a thickness yet. So those are the three type of objects that I can create in AutoCAD: solids, meshes, and surfaces. Now, first we're going to work with solids, right? AutoCAD can create solids from the primitives, or we can create solids starting from a 2D profile. For example, if I draw a rectangle like that, that is a 2D profile. Let me copy that rectangle here. And I am going to explode this rectangle, so I got different objects here. And so if I apply a tool like this, then I can use these tools, they're 1, 2, 3, and 4 tools, to create geometry in AutoCAD out of a profile, right? And so that's the idea. I can create solids with the primitives, or I can use 2D profiles and then use these tools to create three-dimensional objects based on those profiles. Or 2D objects in lines. For example, if I select the extrude tool and then I click on this object and press enter, now I can add an extrusion value, which is basically adding a z-axis value to our shape. Five units. And so see, originally this was not a 3D object. It was originally a 2D profile, but I selected it and then added the value on the z-axis with the extrusion, right? So that's another way of creating the geometry in AutoCAD. So once again, I could create geometry by selecting a primitive, or I can create geometry by using a 2D profile and then selecting one of these tools to modify. We also have tools here in AutoCAD that allow us to edit the solids that we create. And these are called, these tools will have an effect on these objects that we create. For now, there's no need to know more about that right now. Now, let's see what happens when we extruded this object. it created kind of a box, right? So I can also type extrude, right? Select the object, press enter, and then specify the height. So it created a box, and this box is solid, right? Now, what happens if I do extrude on these lines? These lines are separate lines. These are lines are connected as a polyline. These are just segments of lines independent of each other. Let's see what can I do um, when I create an extrusion. Click on the object and press enter and extrude. See, the difference is that objects that are not joined or boundaries that are not closed, all the boundary segments are going to create faces. But if the boundaries are closed in AutoCAD, we can create solids, right? And that's very important to remember, that we can do that. That we can create these vertical faces just by using a line segment to do that. And so I could then, create another. This is a planar surface, the same as the one that I created here with this other tool. So I have a planar surface here, and then I have surfaces on the sides, right? Created with the extrusion. So you can see surface extrusion and surface planar. And I could create another planar surface on top of this here. And now I have a box, but it's a different box, right? Because it's made out of planes or faces called surfaces. This is a solid box created with the extrusion of a joined group of line segments, right? So we can create geometry that way too. So once again, remember, we can create solid geometry with the primitives, or we can use these um, profiles, right? If the profile is made up of lines or line segments that are joined as a polyline, then the resultant 3D object is going to be a solid. If the line segments are not joined, for example, an exploded polyline, then the resultant 3D object is going to be a planar first is extrusion surface or a face, right? So those are different things, different ways to create geometry. And remember that you can use any profile to create geometry, right? That's the idea in AutoCAD. So what if I have something like this? And then I do extrude. Well, it creates an object like that. And what if I have something like this? No, it creates the object like that. And what if I have a polyline like this, PL, and then I do and then I extrude that. Well, I get an object just like that. I'm doing shift, press shift, and then you press the wheel, and then you can do this, right? We are looking at that object like that. Go back home, and you are back on. So that we can see the object better, right? And so the profiles are very useful. It's a very useful tool to create the geometry. It's very simple to do geometry using profiles as well. And we have all these other tools that can work with profiles. Um, now, so I want to make sure we understand that, right? We understand that we can create three-dimensional objects in AutoCAD using primitives. We can create three-dimensional objects in AutoCAD using profiles and then applying these tools here. There are four main tools in the basics: extrude, revolve, loft, and sweep. They do different things. They create different geometry, right? For example, the sweep can do this kind of thing. The loft can do this kind of thing. The revolve can do this kind of thing. And the extrude can do that, right? Now, one of the main, very, very important things that we need to understand here, remember, is that AutoCAD only creates 2D geometry on the X and Y um, coordinates. I cannot create 3D geometry in any other um, plane. The X and Y is the work plane to create 2D geometry in AutoCAD, no matter what. And so it's fundamental to learn that, remember that. And we'll talk about that. Today, we're going to do an exercise that clearly defines what that means. Another thing that I want to show you before we move on is the fact that when working on 3D, then we get to apply the visual styles in AutoCAD. And the visual styles are here. These are the visual style controls. So I'm going to click on that. And now you can see that there are different visual styles. For example, if I click on 2D wireframe, then my elements look like a 3D wireframe object. If I click on conceptual, they look different, right? Once again, let's try wireframe, right? 2D wireframe. And let's change to conceptual. So it's a different way of looking at the object, right? Depending on what you want to do. For example, if I wanted to intervene here, maybe I want to create a polyline here, starting at that point. See, now I can select that particular point that was hidden before. So if I had been here on conceptual, I cannot see it. But now if I am at wireframe, I can select that particular point with precision, right? So which visual style are you going to be working with or on? It depends. Sometimes you change to wireframe. Sometimes you may change to conceptual. Or use the other ones. Let's look at hidden. So now we see the edges of the object, right? And so no longer we see the mass as a white object, but just the edges of the objects as line work. That's the hidden line. Let's look at shaded. Shaded is very similar to conceptual, right? What's the difference? It's the lighting, I think. Yeah, this is light up and this is shaded. Now let's move on to shaded with edges. Now we get the lines on the edges. See the white lines? Go back to shade. Go back to shaded with edges. Those are the lines. Shade. See, this object doesn't show anything. If I do shaded with edges, it shows the grid that make up each of the cells of the surface. Now what happens if we change to sketchy? Well, that's a style that we could apply for 2D actually, right? See a 2D object there? Sketchy lines. It looks as if we had drawn that by hand. And that can be applied to 2D as well, right? All right, let's analyze a couple more here. Wireframe, 2D wireframe and 3D wireframe. What's the difference? This is really black on the background. Wireframe is not. And so this is easier to work with, probably, than X-ray. So in X-ray, it's kind of a combination of hidden and wireframe, right? Because we see some mass added by the lighter gray color, but at the same time, we see the wireframe view because we see all the objects. Now, can we select the hidden objects? No, see, we can't do that. But if we go back to 2D wireframe, then we can. And so these are called the visual styles, right? Let's see what's in here. And now you can see more a graphical interface for the visual style, right? This is conceptual, and then you can decide how to customize each one of them. And, you know, to start with, I'm not going to ask you to modify anything here. This is all set up as default, and that's fine. We're not going to be working on that. All we're going to do is change it, right? Let's go to realistic. That's that. Now, realistic is an important mode because later on we're going to be applying materials to the objects. And let's see if we can get to that. There's something called the materials browser here. And if I open that, then we get all these different materials. Let's select, for example, glass. And we get blue glass. So I'm going to drop this material there. So see, now this object is blue glass. Let's click green and then yellow. And let's make this one red. Okay, now let's do a realistic view. Oh, conceptual. And then let's do realistic. See, realistic shows us the object realistically as it would be if made out of that particular object or that particular material, right? This is that material. Let's change this to be that material. Match properties. And that is that material now, same as that. Let's look shaded. Shaded still retains the color, see, but it doesn't have the realistic lighting. And if we go to shaded with edges, we see the edges of the objects again, but the lighting is not as realistic as it should be. And then sketchy, no materials. And realistic again. See, really, really light, realistic object. Let's see what other material do I have here that I could apply. Fabric, let's see, leather. Let's do a brown leather. And see, that's that. Now, this is not a rendering, remember? This is just representation of the material, but it's not rendered yet. Granite. So we could apply materials to all objects as we move on in our project, right? Okay, now let's get back to conceptual. There's a very important situation here when working in 3D that we need to understand. Once again, In AutoCAD, we can only create geometry on the X and Y axis. For example, let me get back here and create a box. This box has a top object here, but if I wanted to create geometry there, I couldn't because I can only create geometry on the X and Y axis. For example, if I want to create a rectangle and I create the rectangle like that, it doesn't start at the top of this, it starts at the bottom. What if I wanted to create geometry here on the side? Maybe I want to create a circle there. I can't because AutoCAD can only create geometry on the X and Y. So one of the things that I can do is rotate the UCS. And to rotate the UCS, we're going to use this tool here. And so if I select to do a 3-point UCS, the UCS is short for user coordinate system, right? And so what it does by modifying the UCS, what I'm telling AutoCAD is let's make this surface the new X and Y. And so, for example, if I wanted to create geometry here on this grid outside of this cube or rectangle, I can select 3-point UCS and I'm going to do this. I'm going to click on the origin to be that corner, move my cursor this way to define the X and move it up to define the Y. And so see the UCS now says that this line is X and this vertical line is Y. And so now if I wanted to create geometry, I can do that, right? I can create that circle on that specific face. That is one of the most important concepts in working with AutoCAD 3D. The fact that we need to understand how to modify the work plane or the user coordinate system. So now that I have that object there, I could extrude that circle and create that geometry. Now, if I type UCS again, at the bottom, I see the options that I have, and the default option is called World UCS. So I can just type enter to accept that, and then AutoCAD goes back to the World UCS, which is the default Cartesian coordinate system where X and Y are kind of on the floor here. Let's locate the UCS on this other side of the rectangle. So I'm going to do 3-point UCS, click on this corner to define the origin, drag my cursor that direction to define X, and up to define Y. And now I am on this corner, such as this. Let's do a rectangle. It's hard to see because it's white, but let's try to do it. And there it is, right? And so now I can extrude that rectangle. In this direction, see, and we modify the UCS. Now, if I want to go back to my UCS world, which is the default, I can also click here. In this pull down arrow, and then go to WCS. That's the default world UCS where X and Y are on the floor. So what if I want to create geometry on top of this thing? Well, same thing. Select 3-point UCS, click on the origin, X and Y. See now X and Y are at the top of this object. And so I can create geometry there as well. Oh, what happened? The geometry was created somewhere else. Let's do that again. And I'm going to turn off my snaps. And now I got that object there. Let's move it a bit. and extrude. And done. So see, that's how we modify the UCS. Now, AutoCAD by default is going to have what we call the dynamic UCS option, meaning that, and I'm going to go back here to the world, meaning that if I have an object like this, there is an option in AutoCAD that will automatically select the face that I want and create geometry there. That needs to be activated. So I'm going to go to the hamburger and select dynamic UCS. Whatever that is. Dynamic input, dynamic UCS. And once it's checked in there, then I can activate it here. And so now if I want to create that geometry, then I can just hover on top of the object until the face is highlighted. See how this face is highlighted, or this one, or that one. And now the dynamic UCS is allowing me to create that. Let's do actually a cylinder. Right? Now, why would I need to modify the UCS manually if AutoCAD has an automatic version of it? Well, because I can do that in a simple object. But if I have a much more complex object, I'm not going to be able to do that. I am not going to be able to have the dynamic the UCS identify the face of the work plane that I want to start with. It gives me more precision to be able to control that manually um, at any point in time. Because remember that I may have situations where the planes are not as evident. For example, what happens if I were to use a tool called slice? I'm going to use a tool called slice, and then I'm going to do I'm going to slice this object like that. I just made these two objects, right? And what if I want to create geometry there or in a combination of those? And depending on how complex my 3D model is, it's probably better and easier to do that manually, right? And so I can select 3-point UCS, click on this corner, then this other corner, and then that corner. So see now my work plane is at the top of that. Like that. And so we're creating geometry in AutoCAD from the UCS. Now I want to go back to the world UCS, the default. Click on the pull down arrow there, select world, and we're going to back there. I also type UCS and then press enter and done, right? Because that's kind of faster for me, but you can do that as well here. And so these are the basics of working with AutoCAD 3D. And in the next projects, we are going to be doing that to create a 3D project out of the project that you are submitting for us by Wednesday. That's all for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll hang out for a while here. All right, no questions, then we'll leave it there. And I'm going to take 5 minutes break, and I'll be back in 5 minutes to start an open lab. Thank you.